and gentlemen, this is the main event. Fight fans worldwide, you've tuned into the #1 undisputed boxing podcast today. This is the Boxing Breakdown. Now, your heavy-handed, hard-hitting host, Mark Roxy.
What's up, what's up, what's up? What's going on out there, boxing fans and friends? This is your host, Mark Roxy, and I am with my partners in crime. Let's see who we got here today. It is Mr. Harold Hunt. What's going on?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
All right, brother. I got to just make one quick adjustment. I want to introduce you guys to Paul Haberman Esq. Welcome to the show tonight. It's great to see you guys.
Good to be back.
Esquire.
Hold on one second. I just got to make one adjustment over here. You guys chat it up, talk it up.
Okay.
Hey, man. Good to see you back in the house, Paul.
Good to be back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. We did something a little while back. It was pretty good there. You were laying it out pretty easily for us to understand.
I do what I can.
your lingo was you kind of dumbed it down for us so we could follow, and we appreciate that because we understood quite a bit about that.
There we go.
Yes, us law talking people have our own language, so
yeah,
helps to translate.
That was
at times.
A little moment of confusion there. I was hearing myself back. So anyway, welcome to another edition of the Boxing Breakdown. And again, I'm your host, Mark Roxy, and we are here, and we are delighted to be with you. We are going to be chopping up the latest and greatest news. I don't know if you guys have heard. Harold, you want to break the news to them?
Oh, we have Terence Crawford, who has dropped a lawsuit on Bob Arum, citing many racial and breaches of contract. Now, my trotting out of this information is pretty basic, and that's why we have Paul Esquire in the house. So, yes. The basic premise, just as I understand it, is he felt like he was disparaged with his contracts and the way he was treated racially. So, Mark, if you like, let's pass it to the man who's here to handle it.
Yeah, man. Well, what I want to say, for those of you that are listening in and you're not 100% sure, I just want to let you guys know, I want to read a little bit about Terence Allen Crawford, born on September 28th, 1987. He's an American professional boxer. He has held multiple world championships in 3 weight classes, including the WBO, welterweight titles since 2018. Previously, he held the WBO and Ring Magazine lightweight title from 2014 to 2015, and the unified WBA, Super, WBC, IBF, WBO, and Ring lightweight titles between 2015 and 2017. First of all, arguably, he is one of the best fighters in the world currently. I think you guys would agree with that, right?
Yes,
I would.
Yeah, and he's been going through a lot with his promoter, and it's finally come to a climax now where there has been a complaint that was filed in the 8th Judicial District Court in Clark County, Nevada. And basically, Terence Crawford, an individual plaintiff, against Top Rank Incorporated, a Nevada corporation. And the defendants, I'm sure, Paul, you'll get into all the details, but there are pretty much like 6 complaints, I guess, 6 separate complaints. The first complaint being breach of contract. There's a second complaint, I assume, of breach of contract. Third complaint is fraudulent misrepresentation. The fourth complaint is negligent misrepresentation. And the fifth is breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealings. The sixth one is tortious, breach of the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealings. Now, I am somewhat familiar with these things, but we thought, how great would it be for this to be a boxing lesson for those of you that are tuning in, all of you professional fighters out there, all of you managers, and all of you promoters that like to go behind each other's back and say different things that you really shouldn't be saying, right? Breaching contracts is not a good idea. It's just not a good idea. Yeah, fraudulent misrepresentation. These are serious. I think the one that would frighten me the most is the fraud. The fraud count is that's pretty heavy for me. But listen, Paul, can you just weigh in on this stuff? Help us make a little sense of it overall. Just give us an overall view of what is it that's going on.
Yes.
The interesting thing is that the lawsuit generated headlines because of the recapping of what's seen as what's described as a large history of we'll say racially suspect actions and activities and comments by Bob Arum throughout the course of his promotional career. And I had read an article about this morning before I saw the complete complaint. I honestly wasn't even sure where it was going until I read the complaint. But when you read the complaint, you could see that maybe the racial history will factor in and try to establish some of the causes of action. But fundamentally, this is about 3 different things. First, Crawford is claiming that in an agreement that he entered into with Top Rank in 2018, he was promised more fights or 2 bouts between October of 2019 and October 2020, and that he didn't get 2 fights during that time. That's essentially what the first cause of action is a breach of contract because he didn't get the 2 promised fights in between October of 19 and October of 20. Then the second cause of action talks about a breach of contract with regard to the 2019. I'm not even sure how to begin to pronounce that name, but the
Kavalauskas.
Thank you. Anytime I start stuttering over that for the next hour, you could just chime in. In any event, there's apparently a large backstory to getting him to do that fight on ESPN, where they're purportedly, they being Top Rank and Top Rank's people, were purportedly dangling, okay, just take this one that you may not like for ESPN's purposes, and we'll get you a Terence Crawford, not a Terence Crawford, he's Terence Crawford, an Errol Spence Jr. fight by the end of 2020. And he, by the account laid out in the complaint, he relied on that representation to take the fight, assuming that if he gets past the man whose name I cannot pronounce this evening, that he would then have an opportunity to face Errol Spence Jr. With Top Rank's assistance by the end of December of 2020. And he purports in the complaint that he actively relied on that representation, that he truly believed that Top Rank, what Top Rank was saying as far as getting that done. And that that there was even a provision in the contract, which isn't annexed to the complaint, so we don't know what the reality is of that yet, where if they didn't get that fight, he would get a fee of $900,000 as a penalty almost for them not making that fight. And he supposedly didn't get that either, and that runs through a few of the claims. And then as far as the last 2 claims, the breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. What he's talking about there mainly is, that he was generally being disparaged and put down as a fighter because of some perceived concern that Top Rank knew that he was going to fly the nest and go with another promoter or field other agreements. So what they're essentially saying there is that Arum went out of his way to cheapen his market value by making comments about his pay-per-view marketability and everything else during the final stretch of the agreement. Doesn't say he made racial comments, doesn't say it was racist. Matter of fact, it seems to almost pivot a little bit to these comments about him not being bankable or marketable or exciting as a fighter and things of that nature, which, are more individual to him. But just the same, you do have to look at the contract as a whole, and they're obviously putting that history in question against the backdrop of the causes of action, however they might sneak in, to each of them individually, and how, the race factor, if it's something they actually intend on establishing at some point, played into all the actions taken that I've just gone through. But again, this is fundamentally about a failure to get the requisite number of fights between 19 and 20, a failure to secure the Spence fight after it was represented that he would get that one after the Kavalauskas fight. And then it's just this general disparagement of him on various fronts as a result of, some perceived concern that he'd jump out to another promoter when the agreement was winding down. And that correlates, with comments about his marketability and excitement. And one thing I should just say as a boxing fan, getting away from the lawyer role, is that I always found those comments intriguing about his excitement level. I know he didn't sell per se, if you look at the pay-per-view numbers, that well. But if you look at his excitement level, he was a fighter I was always excited to watch, because he's one of the best finishers in the sport. From his HBO debut, he seemed to get better every time I watched him for a long time. Because when I first heard about him, I said to another client of mine who was very familiar with the amateur fighters, I was like, "What do you know about this guy?" He said he was basically a run-of-the-mill amateur. And then every time you see him on HBO, guy gets better and better and better, and that's pretty much what's happened, throughout his career. He just really punctuates all of his wins, all of his fights, and it's a joy to watch generally. But that's just me speaking as a fan now.
I think his record as an amateur was like 70-12. I think that's what his amateur record was. So, I mean, that's not shabby, but certainly,
right.
It's not, if you looked at, Lomachenko's record and you compared it, it's not, if you put
498 and 2 or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's talk about this breach of contract thing, because the fighters out there, the people that are listening, and by the way, if you're tuning in on YouTube, please feel free to put your comments in and join in on the conversation. We're delighted to answer your questions while we have Paul Haberman here, and we just really want to include you in the conversation. So thank you for joining us on YouTube. And if you're listening on the podcast, thanks for being with us there.
Yes.
We appreciate that. And please share the podcast. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notifications right down there on the bottom down there. We would appreciate that for sure. But so let's talk about this breach of contract, man, because a lot of fighters are dealing with this and will continue to deal with this. So.
Well, the first there's two breach of contract claims, really. The first one, again, is a fairly straightforward one that I've seen a lot just in my boxing clients, and that's promoter or manager guarantees a certain number of fights in a certain period and then doesn't deliver them. So the question usually with those is, okay, even if 2 fights didn't occur, where they're bona fide written offers of 2 fights. By that I mean, were you offered 2 fights that even if they didn't occur, that the promoter or manager could turn around and say, I made this offer, you didn't accept it, or the fight didn't happen, but it wasn't because I breached. That doesn't follow that I breached the agreement. I put you in a position to take the requisite number of fights, and it just didn't happen. Whether that's the fighter's fault, the management's fault, the promoter's fault, that's usually where such a discussion will turn. I, for example, had an arbitration with a promoter a couple of years ago where the fighter who was an upstart at the time, was guaranteed something like 4 to 6 fights per year. And the promoter was able to document that, there was as many as 20 or 30, not 20, no, not 30, rather, as many 20 fighters per year in dispute that were raised with the boxer's management as potential opponents. Then it became the question, well, did you ever actually speak with the fighter? Did you ever actually speak with their management about whether they'd fight our guy? Was this more, did you do anything other than look down the list on BoxRec and see who else is potentially able to be fought in that range? Or
Well,
did you actually get to the stage of, bona fide contract discussions with them?
so Paul, it seems to me to be kind of a ridiculous, like breach of contract to me is like the lowest hanging fruit. If you're a boxing attorney, breach of contract in relationship to the clauses that are put in contracts about minimum fights.
Yeah.
I've seen so many things happen, and I know that we've had these conversations before because offline and online, how it's so easy for a promoter or a manager to offer a fighter a fight that's just completely way out of line. And
Right.
knowing that the fighter's going to turn down the fight, and then they have it in the contract that all they have to do is ask the fighter if they wanted the fight.
Exactly. Right. I mean, and if I'm negotiating that for the fighter, I would say there's a couple of ways you could get around that. One, I could turn down any fight I want within a certain period of time. Say you get an opportunity within 3 weeks, and you need 4 weeks to prepare. That won't count against the number for the year if you turn it down with less than 4 weeks notice or 3 weeks notice. There could be a discussion of reasonability with each one. A reason, as long as you can articulate a reason. You could say this doesn't count as an offer unless it's in writing, and we know that there's been contact with the other side. So, so it's not just 2 phone calls and they're done with their responsibility for the year.
Right.
So,
Gotcha. Good.
Right.
And this is where our good friend Adrian Clark, shout out to Adrian Clark, the author of Protect Yourself at All Times, who should be on this podcast. He does great work. We love what he does, and we wish he was on the podcast. But he and I have had conversations about this as well. It's so easy to offer fighters fights that they don't want to take. So fighters beware when it's in your contract that you're going to get 4 fights. You have to really have an attorney take a look at that, right, really closely to make sure that clause actually can stand up in a court of law, because there's a lot of ways that clause can be written where it doesn't. Am I right?
Yeah, or at least it would be too vague to say what actually constitutes an offer. Correct. And that,
Right.
Again, if I could just go down BoxRec in any given division and say, hey, you want to fight him? You want to fight him? I could see about getting him, but seeing about getting somebody and actually taking material steps to say you're going to fight somebody on this guy on this card, he's on board in principle, whatever else, to get it closer to a real offer than just going through a list of who you might be able to fight is what you'd ideally see with these sorts of offers counting as against the year. I mean, I don't know what happened here, but one historical backdrop to think about with this whole Crawford lawsuit, not just for the fights in 19 to 20, but with Crawford, but with Spence, is obviously there's this COVID factor. So there was a certain period of time where fights couldn't be staged, and obviously Top Rank with the TSPN money was one of the earlier ones to get out of that. So it's not as easy a discussion on that point as it would be with other promoters who couldn't do anything for a better part of the year. So
right.
Yeah, well, case in point, Shakir Stevenson during the pandemic, Arum was able to get him $600,000. No one was there during the pandemic, so he fought and he made money, and he was a fighter that was working under Bob Arum. So there's so many different sides to this thus far.
Right.
Please continue.
Well, no, I was gonna ask. So, in terms of the second count of breach of contract, I wonder if Paul, you could just break that down for us.
Definitely. So again, this was with the Kavalauskas fight. Now I think I'm finally pronouncing it. I'm in rhythm. Thank you for your assistance earlier.
There
I
we
think
go.
Egis Kavalauskas, I think it's pronounced. But
You got it now.
have his management call me if I'm butchering it, because I don't like butchering names, but I think that's what it is. Apparently, if you read between the lines, or if it says this explicitly, that's not a fight that particularly excited Crawford. The guy was a well-regarded, but not exactly somebody that's going to draw eyes to Terence Crawford's fights. Somebody that would, however, is Errol Spence Jr. And by the accusations, and I think at least four of the three or four of the causes of action here in the complaint, they're saying Spence was dangled in front of him. If he took Kavalauskas, he'd take, for ESPN's benefit, he agrees to take the Kavalauskas fight. He gets past Kavalauskas, and once he did that, he was either supposed to get Spence net by the end of 2020, or he was supposed to get $900,000 in lieu of the fight if the Spence fight didn't happen. He claims in the complaint neither happened, and he claims at the same time that they duped him and perhaps even had reason to know that would never happen, just to get him to take the Kavalauskas fight.
Right.
And that is at the nucleus of, I believe, 3 claims in the complaint.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we haven't really touched on the very, very prolific writing and repeated discussion of racism between, the fighter and the Top Rank organization. I noticed how you guys really haven't really touched too much on that, but I really wanted to bring it up. Like, this complaint is pretty heavy in terms of the language.
Right.
I mean, I read the complaint 2 times through, and it's the plaintiff is saying some pretty horrific things about the Top Rank organization. I wonder if you can comment on that.
And the challenge for me after reading the opening salvo with all of that detail, is which causes of action are they actually endeavoring to link to that? And I think when you break that down, it's the last 2, because they're saying he said these things about him, and apparently they're relating that back to other things he said about other African American fighters he's handled over the years. But I almost, I write complaints differently. I won't question stylistics, but
Wow.
If I'm not going to lay that out through the causes of action, I wouldn't have necessarily laid it out in the beginning. But just the same, the question is, where does it bleed in? And I think it bleeds in more when they're saying that he was being disparaged in the last year or 2 of his contract by Arum in those last 2 claims in the case, rather than the first ones we just went through.
Right.
And it's an interesting challenge to them to try to prove that, because there's such a grab bag of fighters he's handled over the years, where even if you could isolate comments and behavior, and they certainly did a pretty good job doing that, can you summarily make the claim? And even if you can summarily make the claim, to which cause of action does that help you? So, certainly, I don't want to call it a hit job. It sounds well earned, but again, I don't see how it factored into most of the causes of action in the complaint.
True.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out, how they were going to link it all together. Because once they go and they start doing depositions, how does that work?
Well, I think if you're doing depositions, obviously Crawford would have his say as far as perceptions that he had during the course of his relationship. So that would set the foundation for how he felt like he was treated by Arum along race lines. And Arum's Top Rank, whether it's Arum's or DeBoff or whoever else's deposition, you kind of, to some extent, walk through that history, and try to connect that to actions that took place as to Crawford. Almost,
Right.
which again doesn't feel like the easiest challenge, versus just kind of saying whatever Arum's history is of race relations. He did say this trash that everybody heard on ESPN, saying he lost money on him. He's boring. That doesn't have to rely on any history. That could just rely on the fact that he said that in the last 2 years. I've heard that, and I don't pay attention that closely.
Right.
Between fights sometimes. So when I'm watching.
Well, what about this? What about this in the complaint? paragraph 55, I believe it was 55 there, where he talks about Top Rank has essentially attempted to scare off opportunities for Crawford to fight in televised bouts, thus interfering with Crawford's right to receive the benefits of his
Right.
contract with Top Rank and for his future boxing career. Sounds like there's damages built into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost an assertion that they went in the tank to damage him, even though in theory, after Pacquiao, he could have been their marquee fighter.
Right.
So I'm not sure what the angle would be, why they do that. I'm not saying they didn't, but I'm just not sure how that helps them if they did.
Well, why
What
would
seems to
you
be
do
more,
it? Would you do that? I mean, would you put a? Why would you do that?
I couldn't say why. I mean, the only thing I could explain, from the real time of what seemed to be going on was more that Arum's or Top Rank's relationship with the handlers of other major fighters in that weight range was like
Right.
non-existent. So I'm not sure what the angle is if they're intentionally going in the tank, but I think it's documented, at least discussed over the years that his relationship with Heyman hasn't always been great. His relationship with Golden Boy hasn't always been great. And
Right.
here they are handling, maybe Hearn. And here they are handling a number of people
Well,
that could be mega fights for him.
I mean, is this a byproduct of just doing business in a hurt business? I mean, is it just a byproduct? Is Bob Arum just in a very, very tough business, or is this more than that?
It feels like there's some undercurrent there, and I can't put my finger on it. I don't know why they go in the tank with against their marquee fighter. That's what I can't figure out.
Right. And okay. So what about number 55, where he talks about Top Rank's fraudulent misrepresentation, negligence, bad faith, and tortious actions also created legal fees and costs for Crawford. They've been piling up in order for him to pursue this action.
Well, that's more of just that's more of them saying if we succeed, he's going to owe our legal fees under this prevailing law. I should just qualify that by saying I don't practice law in Nevada. I'm not licensed to, but that's how it reads on the face of it.
Right.
It appears there's a provision they're trying to invoke there under Nevada, either case law or statutory law, that says in certain appropriate circumstances, there could be attorney's fees assessed for compelling this action.
Right, right. Okay. So when you get back to the top of the complaint, they're talking about breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. I wonder if you could talk a little bit to the listeners and to the boxers out there and the managers out there that have no idea what that clause actually means. Can you break that down for us and in the context of the Crawford situation?
Yeah, certainly. Generally speaking, the breach of good faith and fair dealing is a breach of there's never a paragraph in an agreement that says, or usually not, that says good faith and fair dealing. Parties, understand and acknowledge that to deal fairly and in good faith with each other. You know that if you're getting into the contract. That's why most states, including Nevada, apparently, have this breach of good faith and fair dealing, where essentially, if the promoter, manager, boxer, whoever is taking actions that are contrary to the super objective and goals of the agreement, that's where you'd have a claim like that read into it as being breached. And in this instance, what they're saying here is because Arum was disparaging him in one way or another, he compromised, Crawford's overall marketability and ability to get fights, and thus that went against the spirit of the agreement or materially breached due to the agreement by breaching the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. If that makes sense. You're going against the spirit of the contract, basically. You're just taking actions that go against the spirit, even if you're not specifically breaching any one provision that's in writing in it.
So, in layman's terms, how has he done that?
Well, when I believe the assertions in that particular section is when they're saying that Crawford doesn't sell, Crawford's boring, and things like that. And again, the interesting part about that, and I think I saw this in at least one article covering this today, is that one or two of Crawford's ESPN2 or ESPN Plus fights have had pretty solid ratings, even if his pay-per-views didn't do that well. And again, and as I said before, I certainly don't agree with the boring. I mean, there's certain fighters fighter cry if I know they're fighting, but I feel like I should watch anyway, and he's never been one of them. So,
I'm not going to ask you to name which fighters, and
no,
Harold, don't you
thank
name
you.
which fighters either.
I
So,
won't.
no. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it just, well, this is really disconcerting for both parties,
So,
but
Right.
I'm wondering, Harold, what's your take on this all?
well, on the flip side, you've got other fighters coming out in defense of Bob. You've got Foreman, who's come out very strongly about his dealings with Bob in the past. You've got Jared Anderson, who's a young heavyweight now who people may know, and he's been treated quite nicely by Bob. And the allure for Top Rank is he offers a large amount of upfront money. That's
Oh
how he
my
gets you hooked.
gosh.
Okay, PBC, other ones may not give you that huge bonus up front. He does that. He does. That's the operation of his company. So once you get that large upfront money, it takes you from the streets, it takes you from your situation financially, and
Yeah.
you're in pocket with him. Then that's when things, when the contract actually comes into play, and you have to adhere to that contract. And then that's where the disconnect can eventually come. But that is how he works. Now, we all know that so many people have left him in the past and been successful after they've left the contract, what have you. But we know he's also been he's been around since the 40s, 1940. So he's worked with so many African American fighters, black fighters, whatever political term you want to use today, and he's been successful. So the part about, as Mr. Paul Esquire pointed out, it's going to be hard in my mind to put together the ratio back and forth. But the contracts are black and white. The contracts say, hey, you owe me $900,000 because of this situation. It didn't happen. In 2018, you're supposed to give me my fight with Spence, and it didn't happen. If you average all my fights out, as you read the complaints I did, the average is $4.5 million. He should have gotten for that fight he didn't get with Spence. Okay, so, and the basis of that contract was they both were healthy, no one was hurt. That fight should have been made. So just with my basic math, I see 4.5. He was for the 2018 contract and the $900,000. Now I don't know about for the 2019 contract. Now I don't know anything about damages and interest and all that other stuff. But that's how I see it. Now, what affects me is he's only asking for $10 million. He only wants $10 million. Now, you would think a lawsuit like this, he would say, hey, I want 25, I want 40, I want 50. He only wants $10 million. So I'm trying to get my head around why such a low figure for all this splash.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things that I just wanted to touch on a couple things you said. And Paul, maybe you can speak to the why. Do you have an idea of why before I get into what I want to say?
I don't, but I do want to make one point about the Errol Spence thing also being a very perilous claim if this is the right time to do it.
Yeah.
Errol Spence, they entered into this agreement to fight Kevalauskas. He does it. Errol Spence Jr. gets in that serious car accident in October of 19, I think.
Yeah.
Doesn't
but
come
he was
back.
Healthy. He was healthy. He was healthy. When it was over, he was able to fight.
Well, here's the thing. He doesn't fight again. I looked this up earlier. He doesn't fight again until December 6th of 2020, and that's against Danny Garcia. I'm honestly surprised he took somebody that difficult when they weren't sure where he'd be at after recovering from the injuries. I'm saying to myself, I understand in concept that they may have dropped the ball with Spence, but Spence was also out of the lineup and looking for at least a relatively softer touch, it seemed like. Not that Garcia is, but relative to Crawford, he is in his first comeback. And that essentially if he's coming back in December, there's either he was going to take Crawford straight away from the accident,
right,
or that provision is going to be breached. But that then it rolls down to the $900,000 that wasn't paid.
Good point. Good point. Good point.
So,
Wow. Yeah, man. Look, here's some facts and some stats for those of you that are listening in, because I always like to bring them in, you guys. I always like to make sure that the people who are listening in can really be part of what we're talking about. And so let's just give you a little bit of numbers and a little bit of fact to what we're talking about. Okay, Crawford's compensation under the 2018 agreement was based on the platform that each fight was televised on ESPN or another linear television channel, ESPN Plus, or a pay-per-view kind of setup, right? So in 2018, there was an agreement between Top Rank, which they were supposed to pay Crawford for 2 fights. And you talked about this earlier. It was, I guess the fights had to happen between October 13th, 2018 and October 12th, 2019.
and actually, that's where you get 9 million of the 10 million is the 4.5 average per fight.
Right. So Top Rank offered Crawford 2 fights between 2018, 2019. I guess he was supposed to fight Jose Benavidez in 2018, October of 2018, and Amir Khan in April of 2019. Crawford was paid $3.5 million for the Benavidez Jr. bout, plus $45,000, to your point, Harold, $45,000 in training expenses, and $4.8 million plus $50,000 in training expenses for the Amir Khan bout.
Who was dead at the time, literally.
Exactly. All right. So then, during the second year of this agreement between Top Rank and Terence Crawford, there were fights that took place between October 2019 and October 2020. The bouts were against our friend Kavalauskas. On the 19th, Crawford was paid $4 million plus a $50,000 training expense purse. Top Rank breached in 2018 an agreement by failing to offer Crawford a second fight in year 2. Okay, just like, let's break it down, right? In year 2.
That's 19 to 20, right?
Right. And then during the third year of 2018, the agreement between Top Rank offered Crawford 2 fights between October 13th, 2020 and October 12th, 2021, between Kell Brook on November 11th, 2020, and Sean Porter, I guess it was in September of 2021. With the bout held on November 20th, 2021, Crawford was paid $3.5 million for the Kell Brook fight and $6 million for the Porter fight. Top Rank also paid Crawford $50,000 again for training expenses for each of these 2 bouts. Okay, this goes on, guys. This goes on. So you can see the kind of numbers we're talking about.
Right.
The average compensation under 2018 agreement was approximately $4.5 million per bout.
Right.
Crawford, they promise him no less, right? Top Rank owes Crawford no less than $4.5 million for its breach of the 2018 agreement when they failed to provide Crawford with a second fight during the second year of 2018. Now, okay, so now the reason I wanted the listeners to hear that is so that they can get a really good perspective on what we're talking about, what we're specifically talking about. So back to you, Paul. I'd like you to just touch on that breach of contract there now.
So the one is the lack of fights. Yeah, I mean, to anybody looking at it in public, it's inexplicable. Like, you have arguably pound for pound one of the top guys in the sport not fighting for a palpable period of time, and that's essentially what he's saying in this lawsuit. How come I wasn't fighting for this palpable period of time?
Right.
And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like, were there offers, or were they just not doing anything? Was there a reason that fights didn't come together? Or did they try to make these bigger ones?
Right.
I mean, would you fight any hump that they put in front of them just to get 2 more fights out of that year? Or was there very particular ones that were made clear that they wanted by that point in his career?
Right.
So there'll be a couple of things to air out there as far as what if anything was being looked at, and what if anything was being done, and with who was being looked at.
What a mess. Oh my gosh. What a tangled mess.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I don't even know, you know, you'd have to go back. Okay, so let's go and touch on negligent misrepresentation. Let's touch on that, Harold and Paul. Paul, go.
Well, negligent, I mean, that's the roll down from more of a greater intent. It's almost as if with that they're making representations as to the probability or prospect of the Spence fight that they either knew or should have known they couldn't deliver on. And here's what you have to think about with that. The accident can't factor in because that happened afterwards.
Right, exactly.
So that's out. But what's in is that there is this documentedly bad relationship between Al Haberman and Bob Arum. So you have to say to yourself, why would they make this representation that they could hook up the Errol Spence fight if they don't do anything else with
Right.
Al Haberman? At least nothing too voluminous. I know there's been a couple of fights here and there they've made happen with him despite the issues, but you know, and Crawford was saying that he reasonably relied on these representations.
Right.
The question is, you know, that may come out during this case, depending how long it goes, is could he honestly say that he relied on this if he knows the history of bad dealing and relationship between, you know, Haberman and Top Rank? Can you honestly say he believed that fight would happen, given that history? And then, you know, and again, you can't factor in the accident there because that was just representing they could get him the fight. What he's talking about there. Question is, did they ever honestly believe they could get him the fight? So
well, right, or I mean, because I mean, how many times has as a promoter or a matchmaker or someone in the business offered a fight to a fighter or their team, promising them that there would be an additional fight down the road, or you'll fight on TV down the road, or, you know, we're going to put you in, you know, XYZ arena down the road. Please
right.
take this one fight. We really need you to take this one fight, right? How many times has that happened?
Yeah, endless. I mean, actually, interestingly, and I don't think this factors into the lawsuit explicitly. They're also purportedly trying to get Pacquiao into the ring with him, and they had the same promoter for a period of time there, and that didn't happen. So,
right.
I don't know what to ascribe that to. I have no inside knowledge, but that is another one that, at certain times, maybe even during the time he's now claiming he wasn't fighting, that they were trying to make, and you know, it didn't come together for one reason or another.
Harold.
Yes.
I mean, you offer him the Spence fight. That's a huge fight. I mean, what fan out there listening in or otherwise doesn't want to see that fight? I mean, that's one of the biggest fights you could make in boxing right now.
Yes, it's our Leonard Hearns of our existence right now. And hopefully they'll put that together for us. Maybe this whole thing will cause the other promoters and everyone else involved to lower that stance that they have of exclusion, and we can get this fight, you know. So that will be a great fight. I imagine the run-up will be spectacular. I expect him to go to 5-6 different cities. I expect him to go overseas to promote this. I expect a huge run-up and run-out for this fight, which will be a worldwide situation. So that's just, it has to happen. It has to happen, and maybe this is a catalyst to make that go forward.
Right. No, I mean,
you
know, in line 91 of the complaint, Paul, it says Top Rank made these representations negligently and without exercising reasonable care or competence in communicating the falsity of these representations at the time of making such representations, and with the express intent to induce Crawford to act to his detriment in reliance upon these representations. Touch on that.
That's actually an interesting snippet, because when you talk about relying on something to your detriment, that would, I feel like you'd have a stronger claim there if you took the Kavalauskas fight, thinking you'd get Spence, and then Kavalauskas aced him or something. Then they, you know, here they expected to get past Kavalauskas, and just couldn't deliver couldn't or didn't or never intended to, depending what comes out, to deliver the Spence fight for one reason or another.
Yeah, I mean, but again, I mean, if you say you're going to offer that fight and you know that it's not really in your wheelhouse to be able to offer that fight, why would you do that?
Well,
I guess
because of the contract. Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, assuming good faith from Top Rank, and I'm just making this hypothetical because I don't know what actually went on. They might be able to say, maybe there was a conversation at some point with Crawford's people, and they're like, how are you going to get Spence? Al Heyman hates your guts. He's like, well, we've made, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. And these are the two biggest names in that division right now. And I've already made initial inquiries, and I think we can get this done. You can have a conversation as simple as that, but it doesn't follow that at the end of the day, Spence is also arguably one of Heyman's biggest money makers if he kept him healthy and active. So
yeah,
that wouldn't be an easy negotiation either way, even if they're best of friends, and they're not, and purportedly they're not. I don't know anything firsthand, but purportedly they're not.
So what is this sixth cause of action in the complaint? It's tortious breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealings. What is the difference, and what is that particularly?
Now, what's the fifth one called again? Negligent? Or
yeah, it's basically negligent. Yeah, let me.
Oh no, I think the one before it says just breach. The other one says tortious breach.
Exactly.
Tortious would suggest a more actively firebombing effort of Crawford's career by Top Rank. That would suggest everything. Like Tyson's Corner used to say, start throwing punches with bad intentions. That basically is saying Top Rank is throwing punches with bad intentions there, knowingly and intentionally, to interfere with his future upside in the sport.
Right. Well, and again, let's preface this entire thing. Let's just really get into making sure that the listeners know this is a complaint that we're reading a complaint. We're working off the actual complaint. So these are alleged complaints. These are alleged breaches. These have not actually been proven in a court of law. So Top Rank, obviously, and the powers that be at the top of this boxing food chain will have to weigh in, and they'll have to sort through all this stuff. But, I mean, you have just an enormity of different complaints and different angles in here that it seems like this thing could go on for a long, long time.
It could. I mean, and I think one difference between, say, this one and the Mikey Garcia lawsuit, which is my understanding is the same attorney that's handled both. I think I read that in some of the coverage today. Mikey Garcia was still under contract with Top Rank, and he wound up sitting on the shelf as a result of his litigation issues.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Crawford's gone. He could drag this out as long as he feels like spending money on it at this point.
So let's talk. I mean, Harry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were about to say something. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to weigh in on the attorney, Mr. Feldman, just to kind of give some background on him. Paul, I'm sure you're familiar with him, but well, I'll lay it out. He is a winner against Arum already. He was able to negotiate the thing with Mikey. Although Mikey had to sit, he was able to get that done out of court. Now, his clientele is impressive. Vin Diesel, Julia Roberts, Gabrielle Union, various vocal groups, and he advises the Paul brothers on matters. So if the glove doesn't fit, guess who's going to quit? So he's the person for the situation, no doubt. So he has the Hollywood clout. He has the power. He has the wherewithal to really get some things done. The main premise to me is he's won against. He's caused Bob to sell out of court previously, so he's going to know exactly, what the buttons to push and this, that, and other. But as we all had said, because Crawford did this out of contract to Bob, it was the wisest move he could make. It was just very, very shrewd. because now he can still fight who he wants to fight, does what he wants to do.
Right.
As Paul said, if he wants to keep dropping money just to, to go through with it, so be it. But he will not be shelved. He can still have his big fights, and he can drag Bob to justice if need be. So he's got the right attorney. He's got the right situation where he can, in my mind, he can go full steam ahead. And of course, upon winning, all costs for this entire litigation will fall on the loser.
Well, let's talk about that, because let's talk a little bit about the prayer for relief. That is the clause that's used in a complaint, right? Paul, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, as I mentioned, I don't practice Nevada law, and Harold touched on the fee shifting provision. That is, there's apparently something in Nevada law that triggers that. The prayer for relief, generally speaking, is where you'd put your total damages being sought, and he has done that here. You said there was a $10 million number for that. I don't have it in front of me right now, but yeah, I mean, it's one thing to put a number in; it's another thing to be able to document it later on. I think they're seeking punitive, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in there as well, given to the actions.
Right.
That doesn't just summarily come. That takes a lot of different things being established. That's supposed to act as a deterrent. I'm not sure what the deterrent would be here. What they're trying to deter, I guess, future racial activity by top rank. But Bob Arum is 90 years old by the time this is done. This could be against the heirs of Bob Arum, unfortunately, if it drags out. But I'm not sure what the lesson would be for punitive purposes versus contractual purposes. But
Harold, I see the Cheshire cat come out in you. I don't know if you guys are watching Harold down below, but Harold, what were you thinking, Harold? Tell me.
Well, as he said, the heirs, and Todd DeBuff is his son-in-law.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, he's stationed to take over the reins once he retires or he passes on, and he's going to have to shoulder this. But we've all read articles today all over and listened to everything that was possibly available that he has kind of directed Bob on some of these tactics. So he has to face up to some of those things after a while. Of course, as the lawsuit opened up, he's a grumpy old man, this, that, and the other. But you still can't say things, just in this culture any further. You can't. That is not a pass anymore. The cancer culture is real in our society today. So you have to adhere to that. But
That's right.
Bob looks good. He's 90, but he may last another 10 years. So he's going to have to stand up to this. So I'm just saying, I'm just looking, and going back to my old point, that they end it quickly with a settlement out of court.
Yeah. But I mean, I wonder, oh, I'm sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I was going to say, the interesting thing is I can see this going settlement also, but it'll take everybody calming down from this, this explosive, not just the complaint. Obviously, there's some explosive allegations in the complaint, but Arum has also come out swinging today, making some pretty explosive allegations about him and claims. But he's seen this all before, I'm sure. But people have to calm down first before they can really talk about settlement in a case of this incendiary, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is that if there is, if the racial tones that are expressed in the complaint are remotely true from the standpoint of Crawford having experienced that, I think those claims are almost more, more hurtful than any monetary amount that you could have in the complaint whatsoever.
Right. Well, still fundamentally, he's trying to put a monetary value on that treatment. In addition to the more cleaner issues of the breach of contract, there's the issue of he treated me like a second-class citizen, seemingly along racial lines, given his history of suspect racial comments and actions.
Yeah, yeah,
According to the
which
complaint.
is really I think that's going to be a bigger issue as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we all know that the boxing, for those of you that are not necessarily in the boxing world, while there's racism in every corner of the world, those of us on the Boxing Breakdown denounce any form of racism whatsoever, oppression
Yep.
of any kind, anywhere, no matter what the rationale is, it's just not acceptable. I wanted to make sure that I went on the air to say that. And but those allegations to me seem to be a lot more concerning, because those of us that are in the boxing world and do get to work alongside these incredibly talented athletes know that there's just no place for racism in any way in the beautiful sport of boxing. And while it does exist,
Yep.
it's something that has to be rooted out and brought out and really shown for what it really is. So
And that might be. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just want to make sure that I was able to say that those of us on the Boxing Breakdown.
Disclaimer.
That's right, man. That's not. It just doesn't work that way. It's not cool, and it just. I'm just really hopeful that all this stuff can work out. I know that Crawford, in the complaint, he's finding the Top Rank breached its contractual duties and the monies that are owed to Crawford. That's one of the reliefs that they're looking for. Awarding monetary damages in an amount to be proven at trial and over the jurisdictional minimum of this court. For punitive damages in an amount to be proven at trial. Awarding interest in an amount according to proof. Awarding Crawford's attorney's fees and costs as special damages pursuant to Sandy Valley Associates and Sky Ranch Estates owner. I don't know what all that is, but
that's Nevada case law. Yep.
Break that down for us, please, Paul.
So just going back through that in my head, they're talking about damages. On the one hand, damages you could document, which would most readily be the breach of contract damages.
Right.
And most readily for there would be both the two fights that didn't happen, if they don't have a reasonable explanation for why, when it comes down to discovery and testimony and documentary evidence. And then the fact that apparently they never paid the $900,000, we'll call it the Spence tax, for the fight not happening. That was supposedly found its way into writing in a contract.
Yes, that's good. That's good.
Those will be the easier parts of the job. It's the punitive damages, and whether there's cause for attorney's fees, whatever Nevada requires to establish that might prove a little more difficult. Interest, if they could establish the breach of the contracts, the interest would theoretically follow from the period of time where you would have gotten paid money for that. And that's essentially what you have here.
Yeah. Wow. So where do we go from here? I mean, where does this end up? What happens next? Just Paul, give us your I don't want to say legal advice, but just listening to all of this and reading through the complaint, where do you think this is going to end up?
Well, as I indicated before, I think once everybody, when I say everybody, I don't mean the public. I mean when the parties themselves kind of calm down and ease into a litigation, holding pattern, it'll fundamentally become, what does it take to make this right? Now, if this is strictly about, fights that didn't happen, you would think, okay, maybe you don't pay the full amounts, but something for argument's sake would spare us the need to litigate. But there's this other more emotional, visceral, racial component that seeps through it, where that says to me, if Crawford's counsel has the mandate, don't just accept anything, because by the way, there's this whole issue also. You might be in for a protracted case just because the negotiation could break down over this several years. Apparently, a perceived racial-based slight by Top Rank to Crawford, and that's necessarily, I think Harold was making a point. That doesn't necessarily go away with the right dollar value. So
Right. But
that's more of I want to drop the hammer on him, because I had to eat this for several years without comment, and I'm calling in the marker now. So
yeah. So, but as far as Crawford's future in the boxing ring,
mhm.
I'm wondering if you could speak a little to that. I mean, it's not going to really affect him in the ring, right?
No, he's good to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see this effect. I mean, he's if we believe the Top Rank is the reason he didn't get big fights, like such as Spence and Thurman or whoever, and now he's fought Porter, then he should go ahead and get those fights now.
Right.
Especially if he lines up with PBC, which yeah,
Well,
there's no reason that shouldn't happen unless the sides get greedy at that point. So
let's touch on that. Harold,
Yes.
Paul just mentioned PBC.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about Crawford ending up at PBC? And
Well,
yeah.
Well, that's a good option for him, but he can always do the Floyd route, the Canelo route, where he says, "Look, I'm gonna sign you one deal. I'm gonna come over there. I'll fight one time. Al Haymon can make it a birthday party, bring in the pony, and get him to stay.
right.
That could possibly happen. Or he says, okay, I had a good time. This is my birthday party. I'm going to let the Zone give me a birthday party next time I fight.
Ooh.
So everyone's going to have a chance to shoot at him and see if they could get him to stay overnight. So that's what we're looking at right now. So I don't know if he has to sign with PBC. I don't think he really has to sign with the Zone. I think he takes a free agent and he just see what the market can bear. So I think his situation is positive for him.
Paul,
I would agree. I mean, if he could command the same sort of negotiation position that Canelo, for example, has been using, yeah, why not? Why not have a different date night with a different person each time out until he feels like he's home somewhere, if he ever feels it. Otherwise, he could just be a free agent. If everybody feels like they're properly compensated on a one-off basis, and that's worth the risk, why not?
Yeah. Well, the guy's 38 and 0 with 29 KOs, no losses, no draws. I mean, this is a guy, destined for the Hall of Fame for sure. One of the pound for pound best fighters in the world, and we want to see him fight.
Yes, we do.
I think
yes, we do.
He's going to clean up in the headlines for the foreseeable future. I don't see this going away. I do see Terence Crawford, getting in the ring and making some big money fights. Now that this kind of gets opened up like a can of worms, I do think that all the fish are going to start swimming and all the sharks are going to come around and everybody's going to do their dances, their water dances, and eventually the Terence Crawford whirlpool is going to clean up and bring in the cash. I wonder how this $5 million purse that he'd been, getting roughly $5 million each time with the $50,000 training expense, it comes out to about $5 million, right? So how much? What do you think it's going to be? Like, if you could, Harold, if you could just guess, how much do you think he's going to be worth in his next fight?
Well, the public sentiment is going to cause everyone, if I say that word correctly, it's going to cause everyone to galvanize it behind him. Any ticket sales going on sale with his name on it worldwide, they're jumping on it. The media is going to be jumping on it. He'll get a publicist. He'll speak better. Everything's going to change for him after this whole thing is over. He'll be in the forefront, in my opinion, of the public consciousness in boxing and bring us back to where we need to be. As far as his numbers that he's going to garner after this, he could get just, Paul would know more than I would about those numbers on a training camp, as you would also. But I would say, 300,000, something like that. The use of the private planes, the whatever accommodations needed, the whole thing. I just see how that's going to be very positive. So I think he'll do very well going forward.
I think
it's his training expenses
for us as well, because I think what's going to happen is Paul Haberman is going to get the contract to represent Terence Crawford. And what's going to happen is we're all going to be on that plane.
Dial me
too,
up, Terrence.
Wishful thinking. Anyway, no, I think the fans definitely want to see him. I certainly want to see him. I just am. He's pound for pound one of the best southpaws to ever enter the squared arena, and I just really have wanted to see him. I think his last fight, from what his last fight was 11, 20, 21, right? Sean Porter, the Sean Porter fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what prior to that, he fought 1 year prior to that, almost to the date. I think he fought in November 14th here. Yeah, November 14th. So, I'd like to see him more than one time a year.
Well, I think all that's going to change. I really think all that's going to change after this is all over. He hears criticism that he doesn't promote himself in a sense. He doesn't get out front and all that kind of thing. And I believe he's going to do all those things. He's going to be nurtured and worked with, especially if he goes over to PBC in any capacity. Yeah, it's just a one-off, but you're going to have to adhere to, our usual procedure of promotion. So you're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do this and do that and do this. And he's going to do so because, the public has the idea, well, okay, let's see if you can, if you will participate in the promotion of, your event. And I believe he will do so. And I believe this is a discipline that he'll get, and he'll use this for the next, 3 or 4 or 5 fights, because he only has so many fights left in his career at a top level like this. So he needs to go ahead and apply the proper promotion now. He'll have this one. He'll have a Spence. He may have a Spence rematch. He may step down and get one of these other boys that can move up. He may, who knows where he can go with this, but I see no more than 5. I can't put my finger on them all, but I think he'll be disciplined, and I think he's going to have a complete different mode of operation after this whole thing is over, and we're going to be able to see him on a regular. I'm looking at commercials, endorsements. I'm looking at all the things that he's missing him having.
Yeah, if I could say just one thing about that and his marketability. I had the opportunity, I want to say it was around 2014, 2015, to actually interview him at a Boxing Writers Association dinner in New York. And he just seemed like such a genuinely solid dude, a good guy. Just natural, quiet but charismatic, and really not the type of guy that has to carry on to sell tickets. But he's shown he could do that more recently. Also, a little more of a rage or an anger in his more recent years. But just generally good guy, and I think if that could be tapped into, to your point, he should have unlimited potential as far as marketing and anything else for the remainder of his career, and maybe even after, if he decides to do broadcast or whatever else.
Yeah.
So I got a nice, we got to get off the air, but I got a nice story about Bob Arum and his history with African-American fighters that reserve people's opinion. But Hagler was a undefeated fighter, and he couldn't get a title fight. And Bob had him. Tip O'Neill and Ted Kennedy were, one was a district attorney, the other one was the governor of Massachusetts at the time. And they said, hey, man, he's our constituent. He needs that fight. And Bob was resistant to that fight. And they said, Bob, we will drag you in on a fact-finding on your finances if you don't get him that fight.
Right.
Oh, wow.
And Bob relented and got Hagler to fight with Anafermo, his first title, and the rest is history. But Hagler wasn't in line. Hagler didn't have what, at the time, Bob felt was marketable, and he was undefeated. So Bob can be prodded positively. So I was thinking that if Bud did resign with Bob, that he would have gotten that Spence fight done. but he was gone before that happened.
Wow. Yeah, which is one of the complaints, one of the actual complaints. So with that, listen, I really do hope the best for Top Rank, and I hope the best for Terence Crawford and for all the fighters that are under Top Rank's banner. I think it's been a tremendous podcast to really just kind of gloss across some of this stuff and talk a little bit about it. And hopefully we were able to get the listeners, the boxers and the managers out there to really kind of hone in on this. If you have any questions or if you have any thoughts, obviously, hey, Paul, how can they get in touch with you if they wanted to talk legal?
Certainly. Well, I have an Instagram page at Paulie Haberman. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. Twitter is Standing 8 Court. My email, psh@paulhabermanlaw.com. My number, if you want me to go that far, 201-564-0590. Happy to speak with any and all of you.
Oh, now you're going to get all those robocalls, bro.
Oh, no, I already do.
You're going to get
Scam likely.
robocalls.
Scam likely.
Yeah. No, listen, man, Paul Haberman, you're an amazing attorney. You're a great guy. You're an amazing sport to come on and join Harold and I here on the Boxing Breakdown.
Always enjoy you guys.
Man. It's awesome. It's awesome to be with you. It's always awesome to be with you, Harold. And it's great to be with you out there. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, thank you for being with us. If you're tuning into our newly created YouTube channel, we are super excited that you're with us, and we hope that you will share, like, and subscribe. Hit the notification button so you know when we're going to be on the next time. And ladies and gentlemen, peace and love. Harold and Paul, I love you guys. I'll see you guys soon, and we'll catch you on the next edition of the Boxing Breakdown. Peace and love. We are out.
Fight fans, join host Mark Roxy and special guests as they break down all aspects of the boxing world, including news, business, management, training, promotions, fan reactions, upcoming events, matchups, future boxing stars, title fights, state of the boxing world, and all the stuff you don't see when you watch boxing. This podcast is released each week on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Live streamed on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook Live. It's the Boxing Breakdown, hosted by Mark Roxy.